In today's tutorial, we're going to be working on a ballad-style piano improvisation. Now, ballad piano is great because it's really popular with loads of singer-songwriters. It sounds really cool, but it's actually really quite straightforward to get into. You know, if you're just learning about chords and improvisation on the piano, you can make pretty cool sounds pretty quickly playing in a ballad style. What we're going to do is look at a fairly straightforward 16-bar chord progression in the key of F major. I'm going to improvise on it 3 times through, and each time I'm going to talk about the techniques that I've used to create that kind of distinctive ballad sound. The very first time through, I'll make things really straightforward and simple, entirely based on broken chords. So you guys who are literally just starting out, just beginning to get your head around piano chords and improvisation can kind of get something from that. But then the second and third times through, I'll make things a little bit more complex. So those of you who are a bit more advanced can pick up some tips, and those of you, again, who are just starting out can kind of see the pathway into this style of improvisation. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everyone here. Let's start off by looking at that progression. Okay, here we are. As I said, we've got 16 bars in this progression and we're in the key of F major. Just so that you know, we're in 4/4 time, which means we have 4 beats per bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 beats per measure, if you prefer the US terminology. Now, there's nothing desperately complicated or wildly exotic here, and I'm not going to play through the basic progression before we start improvising, okay? That's because the very first improvisation is going to be really quite straightforward, and I'm going to include the chords in subtitles as I play. So even if your chord knowledge is still a bit sketchy, you should be able to pick out which chord I'm playing from the subtitles underneath the keyboard. Before we get started though, there are just a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, you might see there in bar 14, we've got 2 chords in 1 bar, D minor and C, separated by a comma. If you haven't seen that before, all it means is that the chords, if you like, share that bar. Rather than 1 chord with 4 beats on it, we've got 2 chords with 2 beats each. So two beats on D minor, 2 beats on C, and then back to 4 beats on 1 chord, the F, in bar 15. Okay, so nothing particularly complicated there. The other thing you might notice is that in bar 16, we're not finishing on a chord of F, which you might expect if we're in the key of F major. Instead, I've ended the sequence on a chord of C. Now, if you know a little bit of music theory, you'll know that C is the number 5 chord, the so-called dominant chord in the key of F major, and it resolves back, it drags us back very naturally to the chord of F, the tonic chord, okay? So C, F. And the reason I've put that C in the very last bar of the progression is that it gives us a kind of natural pullback to the start, so when you're improvising on the progression yourself, you can just play it over and over and over again and it'll keep looping back on itself, okay? When you want to get to the end, you can, there are various ways of doing it. You can add a little coda, to use a technical term, that will take you back to an F chord, but I'll talk about how to do that in the very last improvisation that I do. Okay, for now, let's get started on a quite straightforward improvisation just using broken chords. First time through, I'll play the improvisation and then talk about what I was doing. Now hopefully you can see that what I was doing there was quite straightforward. I was taking basic chord shapes like F and A minor, yeah, typically playing a 3-note cluster in the right and a single bass note in the left, yeah, and just breaking up the chords and improvising rhythmically on the individual notes of the chord, okay? So very, very simple basic chord shapes, Okay, but just moving around the note. And if you're just starting out, you can create some really quite impressive sounds quite quickly just by doing that. And the way you do it is by playing around with the expression. Okay, I was making a lot of effort to be expressive and musical, but also playing around with the rhythm. Yeah, so if you consider just that F shape that I was playing in the right hand there, and then the A minor. Do you see what I'm doing with the rhythm there? I've just developed that little idea, which I thought of in advance. You know, improvisation doesn't have to be entirely off the top of your head. Yeah, you can come back to ideas, you can revisit them. Yeah, but I just had that little rhythmic motif, if you like, just based on repeating the note at the top of the chord. And I came back to that several times throughout the improvisation. And that's a great little idea by itself. You know, you could build a song off that little idea, and there's nothing desperately complicated. You do need to know your chords reasonably well to start doing this kind of thing. So if you're a little bit sketchy on your chords, as I said, just follow what I'm doing using the subtitles underneath, and then try it for yourself. And to start with, you might just kind of move around the chord notes. Okay, doing nothing more than that. Okay. You'll notice, by the way, that I'm using some, in the right hand here, I'm using a variety of different inversions of the chord. Yeah, if you're just learning chords, it's dead easy just to learn root positions, okay, and kind of stick in those root positions. But when you learn a chord on the piano, you also need to get your head around its inversion. So F isn't just there in the right hand, it's there, okay, it's there, it's there. It's every F, A and C combination that you can think of. Okay, and one thing you will find out, this is something I've talked about before, is that if you choose inversions that fall naturally under your hands, okay, so the F to the A minor, notice that I'm being quite kind of conservative in my movement there to the D minor. So I've chosen inversions of the chord F, A minor, D minor that fall naturally under my hand. I'm not having to jump too much. When I do jump, I try to make a kind of musical moment out of it. So there was one point, I think in bar 7 and 8, where so I got F. This is bar 5, bar 6, C, and then went to D minor, choosing chords that fall under my hand. But then I've got the B flat next, so I went up to the D there. A little bit more of a jump, but it's kind of a more expressive musical moment. Do you hear how that top D stands out? So if you're just starting out, think about the inversions that you're using, particularly in the right hand there, and try to move between chords that have a kind of natural fit between them. Yeah, look for interlocking chords rather than playing F, A, D, and playing everything in the root position. If you're really new, then, you know, by all means do that to get started, but do think about your voicings and your inversions very early on. Okay, I do have other videos on that kind of stuff. Do look back in my timeline if some of this terminology is new to you. Since we're talking about chords, I thought it would be handy to pop downstairs and just have a look at what I'm doing with the sustain pedal, the right pedal, because you might have noticed that I'm using that pedal to kind of stick things together a little bit, to give it a kind of ambient, rich sound. To show you what I mean, let me play just a couple of bars of the improvisation without pedal. Okay, no pedal at all here. You can hear each note is just coming off as soon as I take my finger off it, and you get that kind of very bitty, slightly detached sound. Now, in some circumstances, that might be what you're after, but here we want something that's warmer, that's more ambient, that's richer, okay? That's why I'm going to pedal. So just look at what I'm doing with the sustain pedal here, just again as I play a few bars. See what's going on there? All I'm doing basically is pedaling on each chord change. It's quite a subtle, quite a quick movement, okay? And pedals do vary across pianos, yeah, sustained pedals really do vary, so you will need to get used to how it works on your piano, the piano that you're practicing on, but it's really a very subtle movement, and just with each chord change. So as far as this improvisation is concerned, that's just going to be one pedal at the start of every bar, lift off and quickly down again, okay, except in bar 14 where we've got the D minor and the C both in the same bar. The only other thing I did there that was a little bit different, like a couple of little things towards the end, in that bar 14 that we were talking about, where we've got the D minor, C to the F, I used a little bit of anticipation. Let me just demonstrate. I think what I did was something like this. So from the D minor. Now, if you were counting that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you would find that I actually landed on that F a little bit before the F chord was actually due. So strictly speaking, what I've got going on underneath there is still a C chord, but I'd use some rhythmic anticipation and actually come early onto the chord in the next bar, okay? Yeah, that's a really, really common thing in ballad style piano, in fact in all kinds of styles of pop piano, and we'll consider it again in a second, but that's just something to think about, and rhythmic anticipation. You'll find you start doing it naturally if you do this sort of thing, you don't need to think about it too hard. Okay, so if you're dead new, have a go at that, but for now, let's move on to our second time through. Okay, let's play through again, but this time I'll make it just a little bit more complex. Once again, I'll play through once and then talk about what I've been doing. Do watch out for that rhythmic anticipation that I was talking about a minute or two ago, because I will use that just a little bit more this time. Here we go. C chord to take us back to the start again. Do you see how I was just kind of, I was using some of the same motifs, some of the same ideas there, but some different stuff was happening. By and large, the left hand was still fairly simple, but in the right, quite a bit of different stuff was going on. Hopefully you saw some of the rhythmic anticipation. Something else that was going on there, and quite a lot actually, I was deliberately doing a lot, was what we call suspension, where we're using a note from outside the chord and putting that note from outside the chord on a stressed beat, often at the start of the bar, and resolving back to the chord notes. Let me give you an example. In the third bar we have D minor, and that goes to a B flat, and a little motif, I think I actually played it twice, was something like this. Okay, so at the top of that, the start of that third bar, I was actually playing those notes, because as you probably noticed, I'm now playing more than one note at a time sometime, but that's not a D minor chord. I've got that G hanging from outside the chord, okay? And that creates a tension which naturally resolves down to what is, you know, genuinely the D minor chord with the F there. And then that E acts as a bit of a passing note, also not in the D minor chord. Then we go to the B minor chord, but I'm holding that E on, I'm suspending it, okay? And then resolving back up to the F again, which is part of the B minor chord, okay? And I think I then did that, okay? Again, that's another little suspension. That G doesn't belong, if you like, in the F chord. It's not F, A or C, but it resolves naturally up to the A, which is, okay? So you don't need, again, to create these kind of quite interesting sounds, you don't need a kind of deep knowledge of scales, although knowing the F major scale is going to help you here, but you can just experiment by dropping in little notes that lie just outside the chord and seeing how they sound. Yeah? Okay, those suspended notes that aren't part of the chord but resolve to a chord note. And you can even begin to create little bits of melody like that. In fact, here we have a kind of, there's kind of a proto melody going on there. Yeah. Okay. Again, have a go at that. Sit down at the piano and get into that point, as you know, especially if you don't know a lot of music theory. In fact, you know, the way anyone learns this is to experiment, is to play around. So instead of playing D minor, think, well, what happens if I do that? Instead of playing the A minor chord, I think at one point, I'm fairly sure, correct me if I'm wrong, I actually came down from the B flat there. Okay, so what happens if we put in that B flat? So we have actually what looks like a C7 chord in the right hand, if you know what one of those is, but we're resolving down to the A. And those suspensions always kind of create tension that wants to resolve back to the the principal chord that's going on there. Okay, third and final time through, and this time I'm going to kind of let rip a little bit more. Nothing really dramatic, but watch out for more stuff going on in the left hand. I'll maybe drop in some more broken chords in the left hand to give us a bit more of a sense of movement, and also keep your eye out for the suspensions, the anticipations, and all the stuff that I've been talking about going on in the right. Okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. That went reasonably well, I think. I realise I probably went out of shot a couple of times. Sorry about that. I like to keep the keyboard kind of tightly focused in shot. Sometimes I go out, but hopefully you could work out the chords that I was playing there. In particular, I think the lowest note I went for there was a low B flat, so kind of just that note, but an octave lower. Yeah. Much more movement going on there, and notice how I was using these arpeggios, especially. Not full arpeggios. I'm missing out some of the chord notes often. Okay, I'm using those in the left hand to create a little bit of extra movement. Yeah, coupled with some of the suspensions and stuff that I was using in the right hand, and again a little bit of rhythmic improvisation. Just a couple of things I want to talk about there. First of all, let's revisit that bar 14. Each time I've played through, I've done something like this. Which I find really kind of pleasing and satisfying. Yes, so something along those lines. Just the two triads resolving to the F in the right hand. Yeah. If you know a little bit about music theory, you might be saying to yourself, why are you just playing a C chord there, Bill? Why not play a C7 chord? Okay, which is the kind of natural obvious choice. If you know a bit of music theory, you'll know that C7, C dominant 7, resolves even more strongly onto the F than does a regular C chord. So regular C to F, C7 to F is an even stronger resolution. The reason I'm avoiding the C7 there is to make it sound a little bit more, to give it a little bit of kind of clarity and naturalness. Okay, just a little bit of simplicity. You can create some beautiful musical effects just by being really simple. Yeah, adding complexity, adding extension chords, adding tons of extra stuff might be cool, but it's not necessarily the way to make better music. The other thing that I did there was just create a little bit of a coda at the end, okay, C-O-D-A, coda, which is a way of rounding off the improvisation. You might remember that in bar 16, the very last bar of the progression, I've actually got a C chord to take me back to the F chord at the start of the progression, so we have a loop, but we can't finish on that C chord. That's not very satisfying. We need to finish on an F chord. So the way I did that was just to play the bars 14 and 15 twice, okay, creating a coda and ending. So bar 14, bar 15, and bar 14 again. Okay, and I'm slowing down. I'm giving it a little bit of a ritenuto, a slowing down there, just to create a satisfying ending. There are various ways you can do that, okay? But you know, as long as you find a way of getting back to the tonic chord, usually via a chord like the number 5 chord, so back to the F chord via something like a C chord, and you know, you will usually find a pretty satisfying way of wrapping up an improvisation. As ever, if in doubt, keep it simple. Okay, so the thing to do now is to look back through all 3 improvisations that I've played through. You might want to copy some of the stuff I've done. You might want to, you know, pick out some individual bits. If you're struggling with chords at any point, then the thing to do is to really learn the chords, okay, to get those really automatic so that you don't have to think very hard about those at all, so that your fingers naturally find the chords, and your kind of you know, the rest of your brain, if you like, can be given over to making it musical and making it creative and making it interesting. Okay, so there we go, another tutorial bites the dust. Take that stuff away, see what you can do with it. Remember always to be creative, to try and explore, have fun at the piano, and begin to work things out. Yeah, that kind of experimentation is the way to make progress with improvisation. Before we go, as usual, just a couple of quick plugs for my books. In particular, How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you. If you are just starting out with chords and such like, it will really help you understanding this stuff. You do need to be able to read a little bit of sheet music for this one, okay? But if you can just read really basic stuff, then it will help you. By the way, if you want to learn how to read sheet music, do check out my ongoing series of Piano for Absolute Beginners tutorials. Yeah, I'll include a link actually right below this tutorial, yeah, because that's proving pretty successful, pretty popular. If you want to learn how to read music and play the piano from music, which I really recommend because it makes things so much easier, do check out that playlist. I'll also give a quick mention 7 studies in pop piano. If you can read music, 7 short pieces of music, very much in this kind of style. There are several kind of ballad style pieces in here, each with an explanation of how you can improvise on it, how it works, how the chords work, all of that kind of thing. And again, proving really quite popular. Graded, so the first one's really quite easy and the last one's not difficult but kind of intermediate difficulty. Cool. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. Somewhere down there, I always miss it for some reason when I point, but it's about kind of there, is a red subscribe button. Just click that and subscribe. Comment, like, share on Facebook, you know, do whatever you want. Print it off on a t-shirt, walk around your hometown, you know, wearing it. That would be cool. And also, if you could support me on Patreon, that would be amazing. My crowdfunding campaign, patreon.com/Bill Hilton, just $1 or $2 a month per tutorial, whatever. It's all cool. It helps me devote as much time as possible to sitting down, playing the piano, developing new resources, creating stuff for you guys, rather than having to go out and do the boring freelance advertising work that I used to do all the time, and which was really tedious. Anyway, you don't want to hear about that. You want to go off and play the piano. So there you go. Off you go. Have a good time. Next tutorial coming very soon. It will be the next one in the Piano for Absolute Beginners series, as it happens. Okay, enjoy. See you soon.